Good evening. Now we're going to be listening to Marina Gasco, teacher of philosophy of law at the University of Castilla-La Mancha and head of the Master in Health Law and Bioethics. She regularly collaborates in postgraduate programs in Spanish, Italian, and Latin American universities. She has focused her research on subjects of political philosophy, bioethics, constitutional justice, and theory of argumentation, with specific attention paid to evidence. Recent publications include a number of works such as The Possibility of Having Standards of Evidence, The Nexus of Cause, Reason, Scientific and Legal, to Value Scientific Evidence, and Multidisciplinary Analysis, Myths and Paradigms of Evidence, Expert Knowledge, and Defending Choice. She's also an extraordinary speaker, so let's listen to her. She has the floor. Thank you very much indeed, Jairo, for your presentation, for your introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to Jordi Ferrer and, well, in fact, my thanks to the organizers of this magnificent and incredibly well-organized conference. I really feel honored in having been invited to share my presentation with such an incredible and prestigious group of experts on evidence coming from all over the world. And I liked it as well. It's nice to be here because you get the chance to see a number of friends and colleagues, especially those from Latin America, whom I don't see as regularly as I would like. So because of all these reasons, thank you very much, Jordi, for your invitation. I have the doubtful honor as well of being the person closing this first and very, very intensive day. And I say, well, doubtful because I know positively that most of you are really exhausted after being all day long listening to such extraordinary high-quality presentations. Of course, it really is exhausting because one analyzes deeply. And I am very unfortunate in that, well, before me this afternoon, well, we had Carmen Vázquez on the one hand talking not exactly about the same as I'll be talking about, but about similar concepts, and most especially Professor Gary Edmond, who talked about fingerprints, and precisely, and there you go, I'm very unlucky, it's what I had selected as an example to show, well, that constituted really the axis of the reflections I'm going to be sharing with you. So I don't know, maybe with such precedents, the best I could do would be to shut up and we could all go and have supper early and then, well, close today like this. But the organizers won't let me, I have to tell you. So I'm sorry, but you'll have to stay here for a little while longer. Well, my idea in this half hour or 40 minutes in which I'm going to be talking is, well indicated in the title of my presentation, because my idea is to examine, pretty briefly that year, the challenges that we have in order to improve the contribution of forensic science to justice, and in a parallel manner, in order to avoid judicial mistakes and judicial error insofar as that is possible, and increase the justice of the system of justice. The reason for this goal, as has been made abundantly clear in the words of Professor Gary Edmond, is so clear in the Anglo-Saxon world, because there has been intense discussion both in forensic science that has been really put in the eye of the storm regarding criticism, and also in the legal community, because, well, for quite a time now, experts are talking about the reliability and the admissibility of such scientific evidence, if you could call it this way, and there has been a discussion in society itself, because at the end of the day, all this has generated a certain concern about the risk of commission of judicial errors. So I don't know whether this goal is so clear amongst us all. Well, because in our case, these discussions have been mostly absent, or at least they've had a kind of lesser repercussion. What does unite us all, has united us and unites us still, I'm afraid, is the enthusiasm about forensic evidence, which is increasingly used and increasingly demanded in all different processes and procedures. The success of forensic evidence possibly lies in its supposed contrast regarding evidence that is not forensic, because traditional evidence is seen as problematic, fallible, surrounded by uncertainty. For example, to assess what an eyewitness says is not an easy task. We all know that. And in fact, judges are fully aware of their inherent fragility. And quite the contrary, information supplied by forensic experts are typically seen as scientific, and because this is the case, judges and people in general tend to deposit huge amounts of trust in them. And this trust in forensic evidence can be explained on the basis of a number of reasons. First of all, I think, and also maybe what is most important, because we still have, most of the population that is, still has a deficient scientific culture that takes us or leads us to deposit exaggerated expectations on the analysis that come from science. Why? Because we ignore the result of an analysis in most of these forensic disciplines is expressed in a judgment of probability in the particular case that has an intense personal or subjective component, because the assumption is that forensic analyses are based on scientific knowledge, applied as well with rigorous methodology in such a way that if they have been well carried out, that's the idea, well, they could be considered objective or at least unquestionable. So all in all, we tend the knowledge obtained in courtrooms is fragile, but however, what happens in the labs of the scientific police is something completely different. On the other hand, it must be known, we must know about the influence on all this of the DNA test. The huge prestige of this forensic test has eventually projected or been projected as a kind of radiation or contagion effect on other forensic disciplines that, however, are very, very far from having such an incredibly solid basis as is the case of the DNA test. In any case, and whatever might be the main causes explaining this phenomenon, what is undoubtedly clear is this huge trust that we all tend to put on what those white overall experts state. Unfortunately, experience shows us that there is no reason for such blind trust, and that when forensic science is used, mistakes are also possible. In the year 2004, we were able to know about one of the most scandalous mistakes and possibly one of the most harmful for the prestige of forensic science. I mean, I refer to the Mayfield case that was commented before by Professor Edmund. And this error happened with occasion of the investigation that was carried out on the basis of the attacks that took place in Madrid, Atocha, the train station. The error affected precisely one of the forensic analyses that was most used and that had the best basis, the analysis of fingerprints that Professor Edmund has analyzed and told us about in so much detail. And furthermore, it was a mistake made by the FBI, supposedly the kind of most sophisticated body in the world of forensic evidence. The story is a well-known story, but however, I would like to remind you all of this story very briefly, because I think it's a very good example of the main problems that come along with all these tests and this kind of evidence. The Spanish police found a fingerprint in a plastic bag that contained material for the bomb's detonation as part of international collaboration that had been requested by the Spanish police to identify potential suspects. The FBI analyzed the fingerprint in their US lab using their very powerful integrated system of databases that then contained already practically 50 million samples, 50 million fingerprints. The system produced a list of 20 individuals, of 20 possible coinciding or matching fingerprints to that one found in Madrid, and analysis started. The fourth on the list was Brandon Mayfield, a lawyer from Oregon. 3 experts of the FBI, first one and then the other 2 later on, validating, as was the usual modus operandi, concluded that the fingerprints clearly matched. There was a match. Total coincidence. So Mayfield was identified as the source of that unknown fingerprint, and with no other added tests, he was detained as a possible author of the attacks that took place in Madrid. Naturally, Mayfield was saying that that had to be a mistake because he had never ever set foot in Madrid, and he had never left the US in the relevant time period in which the attacks took place, and furthermore, he didn't even possess a passport, and all that could be easily proven. After the report of the FBI experts accrediting this coincidence, this match of the fingerprint, the experts of the Spanish police re-examined Mayfield's fingerprint, and to the great surprise of everyone, their conclusion was negative. No match, no coincidence between the 2 fingerprints. Despite the fact, and after many comings and goings, the experts of the FBI refused to change their report, and they insisted in that, yes, fingerprint match, a coincidence. So a total and absolutely clear match in their exact words, 100% sure, no doubt about it. And furthermore, an independent expert appointed by a judge confirmed the fingerprint match as well. Some weeks after that, the Spanish authorities located another suspect, a person from Algeria, and according to them, he was the source of the fingerprint. At the end of the day, the FBI experts, after examining themselves, because they didn't trust it, the fingerprint of this person from Algeria, agreed, and Mayfield finally was released. The question then is, what went on here? How can it be? How is it possible that this huge mistake was made? The report itself, issued 2 years later by the Department of Justice of the US on the case, highlights a number of aspects, a number of factors that could explain the mistake. I'm going to be highlighting only 3 of them all. The 3 FBI experts stated that Mayfield's fingerprint coincided and matched with the one found in Madrid because, yes, indeed, there was a great similarity between the 2 fingerprints. One unusual similarity, they said. But the problem, of course, is that to go from similarity of fingerprints to affirming coincidence is, in a way, a leap of faith for many reasons. First of all, we don't know what the frequency is of this kind of similarity of fingerprints among the general population. We don't know because no studies have been carried out that determine that. What is the probability that 2 people taken randomly actually have that similarity in their fingerprints? So then, of course, in this instance, similarity cannot be really interpreted. But furthermore, there is no agreement as to how much similarity there must be in order to conclude that, yes, there is a match. And we don't know accurately, at least, what the associated error rates are with that method. So all in all, the result of the fingerprint comparison depends then on the subjective judgment of the expert. If it can be said in this way, the expert then is the expert is wrong. So then it calls our attention that there are no contrasted data that make it possible to see the reliability and accuracy of the technique. But why the experts use these very categorical expressions to affirm and confirm the similarity, the match of the two fingerprints? They were talking of 100% certainty, they said, no doubt about it, zero error rate. But the problem, of course, is that they expressed their opinion in this way because this is the way they usually express their opinion. It's also very possible that in this mistake, an important role were played by cognitive bias. When the Spanish police complained about this match, the FBI experts already knew many more things about Mayfield. They knew, for example, that sometime previously he had converted to Islam, and they knew as well that as a lawyer he had defended a well-known terrorist in family trials. So to speak, Mayfield was the perfect suspect. And this might explain existence of these experts to even contemplate the possibility or the fact of them being wrong. The Mayfield mistake is interesting because it really highlights that if in the analysis of fingerprints things like this can happen, incredible, huge mistakes can happen like this one, well, then we do have reasons to suspect that those same mistakes and errors can take place, and even more justifiably, in other forensic techniques that are worse off scientifically than, for example, the analysis of fingerprints. In fact, 4 years after this Mayfield mistake, the suspicion was eventually confirmed by the report issued by the North American Science Academy about the state-of-the-art of forensic sciences. I refer to the well-known and already repeatedly quoted report that was issued in 2009. This report actually brings about serious deficiencies in most identifiable forensic disciplines. To begin with, many of these disciplines are based on experience, but the analysis methods have not been really validated using the habitual criteria of science, so their reliability is unknown. We don't know either about error rates, and in fact, people have not studied, at least with rigor, with what frequency or what causes this rate of error amongst experts. So then to trust that the results of all these analyses are true, and especially when experts say what they say with this incredible intensity, makes it all really an issue of faith. And not enough attention has been paid either, and this has been mentioned repeatedly during today, so to the risk of cognitive bias that might be suffered or experienced by the expert, and that come essentially on the basis of the lack of information that the expert has about the case, because frequently experts have access, for example, through the police or the prosecutor's office of data not really important or necessary to carry out the analysis, but that in a way could induce to bias in judgment. For example, sometimes, well, they know that the suspect has some kind of alibi, or that he or she has confessed or has previous sentences already. And all these informations, in fact, can generate a bias because it has been very well proven already that human beings have this cognitive tendency to see what we expect to see. And, well, there can also be a kind of bias of the institutional role itself that experts believe that they are playing. Most of the criminal labs are part of the structure of the state. They are part of the police organizations of the state. So it's not surprising that many forensic experts see themselves as glorified police people with white overalls, and more than working independently or in an impartial, very objective manner, they work on the basis of the goals of the prosecutor's office and of the police. So the quality of practices in forensic labs as well is far from being satisfactory. The report pointed out as well the lack of autonomy of most of the labs, the lack of supervision, of effective supervision, and the non-compliance of rigorous action or acting standards. And the report denounced as well that the labs don't really establish adequate training and adequate ongoing education of the experts, and doesn't make experts pass rigorous competence and skill tests for the examinations they have to carry out. The lack of transparency of the labs is also something that attracts our attention. For example, in the case of lawyers and also in the case of judges, it's very important to know what the mistakes and errors have been detected by labs, and that can, of course, have an influence on the quality of analysis. But this information isn't made public, and it is always there and remains behind the walls of the different labs. The way in which experts communicate results of their analysis to the courts is crucial. But unfortunately, quite frequently, the forensic reports exaggerate the results. The central problem here, then, is the use of non-precise or accurate terms that can be not well understood by judges and lawyers. For example, those experts in dactyloscopy say that there is quite a relevant similarity between two fingerprints. What they're saying really is that the latent examined fingerprint coincides with or is identical to or presents an unusual similarity to the specific fingerprint that it is compared with, and that suggests that both fingerprints come from the same source. Furthermore, and as we have seen as well, very frequently they affirm that their conclusions are based with a high degree of scientific certainty, and in some cases they even state that there is 100% certainty in the opinion or that the rate of error of the technique is 0. All this technology suggests that by means of a forensic method, be it what it may, it is possible to link to a high degree of certainty the remain or trace that is being analyzed and link it to the specific source of origin, excluding any other in the world. And furthermore, they also suggest as well that the technique is infallible. However, there are no reasons really for these very strong assumptions, because accepting the nuclear DNA test, there is no identification forensic test that has been able to prove up to date the ability to link with a high degree of certainty one trace or mark with a person or with a specific source. So, in fact, all this terminology that experts use so easily seems rather rhetoric for the consumption of the courts. So on the basis of all this, we could say that what the NAS report has taught us is that forensic disciplines need of greater transparency and less exaggeration. Naturally enough, the criticisms to the NAS report are referred to science and forensic practice in the United States of America, but honestly speaking, I don't think that there is any reason at all to think that these criticisms couldn't be applicable as well to the rest of the world. The diagnosis of NAS has been, up to a point, something really destructive, because it has highlighted the fact that accepting nuclear DNA testing, the forensic tests for identification are clearly overvalued and oversold. And there is a final message, a take-home message that follows that's rather kind of sad. When forensic evidence is used in a process, I mean, everything is made possible. But on the basis of this very hard diagnosis, we would say that the number of forensic evidence that is used could be concerning. In fact, in recent years, this concern has been confirmed, because although it is true that it is rather complicated to establish the prevalence of judicial errors in the system of justice, some studies have proven that the defective forensic technique lies behind many, many judicial errors. For example, the Inocencia project estimates that the use of bad forensic evidence is present in practically half of the more than 350 exonerations that they have achieved by means of DNA testing. And the FBI itself admits having made mistakes for decades in the analysis of human hairs carried out, and it has accepted to review thousands of criminal causes that had been closed already. So what all these statistics are showing us is especially worrying. The risk of judicial error when forensic data, defective or overvalued forensic data are used is a real risk. But judicial errors are the paradigm of an unfair sentence. So then we could say that there is a moral obligation here and a political obligation of acting to make sure that those errors don't occur, to act in this direction. The need of acting to prevent errors and mistakes is something that we should impose in the two fields of activity involved in any forensic analysis. On the one hand, the forensic discipline carrying out the analysis, and also the action of the courts receiving the results of forensic testing. So then we have law and forensic science. If we had to say in a very summarized manner what should be done in order to improve the contribution of forensic science to the administration of justice, I think then that we could express it in two words: prevention and education. Prevention, to make sure that we prevent bad forensic science from reaching the courts, and education or training, to train and teach judges so that they have the adequate tools for them to examine with full sense what the forensic witness and evidence is, and even not use it if that were necessary. Prevention is then the road to go for forensic science, and education is the challenge for the field of law. Forensic science has an unquestionable moral dimension. The data that forensic science gives us have a practical effect in the life of people. Any epistemic subjects and questions involved in forensic testing have then also this ethic dimension. And because of this, forensic science that is committed both morally and politically has to do as much as it can to increase the quality of the forensic tests that are given to court as a means of increasing the justice of the system of justice. In fact, that way to go, that avenue that, according to the NAS report, forensic science has in front, is a shift of paradigm that represents a true ethical challenge. In recent years, quite a lot of headway has been made in the scope of forensic sciences. The scientific basis of some forensic disciplines is growing slowly and gradually, and other disciplines are eventually being discredited precisely because the methodology lacks the necessary validation or support. Headway has been made as well in the standardization of labs and in the accreditation and qualification of experts. Then studies on cognitive bias, as has been said during today as well, nowadays are pretty numerous and well known. And we see also many advances and progresses being made in what, in my humble opinion, might be the central question, the rhetoric of the experts' declarations. Forensic experts are beginning, at least in some disciplines, to state their conclusions in another different way, and they are beginning to change the terminology used in their witness and their reports. For example, in Europe, in the year 2015, that is a short time back, within the MC network of crime labs in Europe, there has been an adoption of certain common rules in order to communicate results of forensic analysis to the courts. Yes, it is true. There's a long way to go as yet, a long way to go. And in fact, many of the concerns put forward in 2009 by the NAS report have been repeated time and time again by other very important reports in the field. In any case, and despite all these lacks, I think it is fair to admit, fair to acknowledge that there is an effort being made within the forensic community, and they want to reform and improve their disciplines. And today we can really say, indeed, that something is happening. Some people even say that this has happened already. There has been a shift of paradigm in forensic sciences. However, all this is not enough. There is still an important drawback, an important obstacle in front of us in order to guarantee trust in our system of justice when forensic evidence is used. I'm referring to the courts. The transformations that are taking place within the forensic community will never guarantee the quality of judicial decisions if we don't see something happening as well, a change happening in legal culture. Also, judges, and not only experts, have to play a decisive role by ensuring the quality of such forensic evidence. In fact, this is the genuine meaning of the Dauber sentence in the US. Beyond the famous Dauber factors, the sentence is an exhortation to the judges for them to critically examine the reliability and the accuracy of the expert witness. The challenge that judges are facing in working on the problems put forward by forensic tests can be examined when we see the education and deference in the way that it has been put forward by Ronald Allen, Professor Ronald Allen, here in this room. What I consider is that this approach is particularly interesting because of three specific reasons. First of all, because deference and education are reflecting, respectively, the two paradigms of forensic science on which, or in which this has been divided after the incredible barrage of criticism it was submitted to. The deference, of course, is consistent with or reflects the paradigm, the pre-critical paradigm, so to say, and education is consistent with or reflects the post-critical paradigm. Secondly, why this approach, deference and education? Well, it is applicable to all expert evidence and not only to forensic science. So then it would make it possible to explain and work on a wider range of evidence. And then finally, and most especially, as Professor Allen himself points out, because this approach shows clearly that education and its parallel in forensic science, the post-critical paradigm, is the only thing compatible with the epistemic orientation of the process that belongs to the state of rule. Courts usually have an attitude that is pretty differential towards forensic witnesses. So the judges tend to accept what the experts are stating without greater control about reliability. To be more accurate, judges carry out control, but the control carried out, and this has been stated very clearly here today, is rather superficial or merely formal, and it is only experts have the formal necessary qualifications so that they have been more or less trained and they have sufficient experience to be experts. Sometimes they also mention the time during which a specific technique has been used, and most especially, well, owing to the fact that other courts have also used and considered those techniques or evidences valid, but they don't go beyond this. A critical attitude towards expert evidence is in a way understandable because deference is a generalized attitude concerning any kind of expertise. So if furthermore the expertise is submitted or presented as scientific, and this is what happens with forensic evidence, well then the tendency to deference results much, much greater. But I think that very possibly there is another reason explaining the deference of courts regarding forensic evidence. What judges expect from experts is clear and efficient results. The judges expect that the expert, with his or her knowledge, will tell them what they need to know in order to make a decision. For example, judges want to know whether the latent fingerprint found in the scene of the crime belongs or does not belong to the suspect in such a way that when the expert declares that yes, there is a match, and furthermore, the expert says that this match is legitimated by the method with a very high degree of certainty, well then the courts tend to accept that the expert has, yes, indeed, achieved identification of the fingerprint, and they accept it without greater control. However, there are no reasons for such high levels of trust. This deferential attitude, as has been made very clear, I guess, is not at all compatible with the deep criticism that forensic science has been submitted to, especially in the last decade. It is criticism that, in fact, pushes judges to examine the multiple questions and issues that maybe didn't go well during the analysis. And because of this, the legal community has to make sure it does what has already been started by the forensic community. Wake up and start assuming its own responsibilities in the use of forensic science in the court. And this means then that before adopting or making a decision, they have to control what the experts are declaring and not accept it with no further inquisition. So in fact, what we need is a real change of legal judicial culture. Courts have to abandon that deferential attitude of the past that in fact they are still manifesting towards forensic evidence. First of all, they have to abandon deference because of institutional reasons. Deference is not compatible with a system of evidence that attributes to independent and impartial judges the task of them determining the facts of the case, and so then assessing all, including forensic evidence. Because when the courts are too deferential towards the evidence of the expert, that is, when they accept this evidence with no greater control, it can naturally enough be said that it is the courts that formally have decided, yes indeed, but substantially, in fact, who will have decided will have been the experts. So all in all, with deference, then there will have been an instauration, so to speak, of a new evidence system based on the authority of the experts. But, as I was saying before, there is another more decisive reason for abandoning deference. Deference doesn't go well with the epistemic orientation of the process in the state of rule. The state of rule, at least in the way in which it has been developing in the Western world, presupposes that only judicial decisions based on reconstructions that are true are legitimate. But deference means that judges accept the forensic evidence without examining it or submitting it to scrutiny, and that means without really understanding why they decide what it is that they are deciding. And this might take or lead judges to accept the entry in the process, or accept as valid science that is deficient, defective, or trash science, as it is defined sometimes. All in all, data that have practically no scientific foundation whatsoever that might incur or eventually end in judicial errors. So then, because of epistemic reasons, but also because of political or moral reasons, we have to make sure that we overcome deference, because however much forensic science progresses and however much the disciplines improve and make headway, if the courts still accept the evidence of experts without understanding it and without controlling it, if they accept with no more control or no more inquisition their very exaggerated or non-justifiable assumptions and affirmations, well, then the veracity of judicial decisions will not be guaranteed. However, there is a drawback, a hindrance to go towards overcoming deference. Judges, like most of us, typically don't have, they typically lack the knowledge and necessary skills to analyze the evidence of experts well. They have been trained for legal analysis, that yes, but they've not been trained really for forensic or scientific analysis. Judges, all in all, have not been trained and educated in order to see whether and understand whether the technique that the expert used is reliable, or what the value should be given to the results obtained, if they deserve any probatory value. Possibly the lack of understanding of statistics as well might pose serious problems. Statistics plays an essential role in the interpretation of data resulting from forensic analysis. Forensic disciplines are based essentially on probabilistic laws, and the data portrayed in the conclusions of the expert report are basically statistical data, the interpretation of which might be rather complex and daunting and even counterintuitive. And furthermore, it has been proven already, this disproportionate weight that people in general and legal experts in particular attribute to statistical data. And that's why when there is the lack of some knowledge of statistics, bad interpretations of data are really something that happens very frequently. Even a person with great experience in quantitative experience, such as Richard Fossner, one of the judges and most prestigious people in our world, even he makes this kind of mistake in his task as a judge. So if we want to make sure that judges move away from deference and decide rationally or on the basis of proper thought, it's obvious then that judges have to be better trained, better educated, better informed. Only with a great awareness of what forensic science can do in the practice and with good information and knowledge to understand what the expert is declaring, only like this will courts be able to transform themselves and will they be able to maintain their decisions away from forensic data that are invalid or not really reliable. Education and training then has to go towards increasing or reinforcing the knowledge basis of the judge so that the judge can carry out a well-informed and rational decision in his or her job. So education can be obtained through different paths and avenues. The expert inform itself can and must be a very rich source of information. So then, if we can say it this way, the expert report has to and should have an educational dimension, a full report with good descriptions of the analysis methods that have been put into place, the procedures, the results, the conclusions, a rigorous report identifying the sources of uncertainty associated to the method, the rates of error. This kind of expert report will allow judges to understand better what has been done, and so it will help judges carry out a well-informed control of the conclusions. But the report of the experts that is crucial might not be enough, and that's why it is important to think as well about other forms and avenues of education. For example, as some have mentioned already, at least in the case of Europe, the possibility of establishing some independent organ that would help judges decide in cases that are difficult or complex, or acting as a main consultancy body for political and judicial bodies regarding the reliability of a technique. And undoubtedly, of course, we have to think as well about the training of judges themselves by means of, for example, special training programs organized by the judiciary power. This happens in Spain. In Spain, we have the Council of the Judiciary Power that regularly organizes training courses for judges, always addressing the legal and regulatory issues that are important, and that might be an opportunity precisely to teach about this. So training about the nature of science and about the scope of science's methods, training into the most important forensic techniques, at least those that are used most, training about terminology used, and training about the meaning of some statistical data. So regarding the training of judges, people say often, and they object, that this is not a realistic goal. They say that it's really impossible for judges to eventually be sufficiently trained in everything. In my opinion, however, this objection is rather too impetuous, because the aim of this training isn't, because it cannot be, to make judges become mathematicians or scientific experts. The aim of this training of judges is very simply to help judges understand the kind of analysis that has been taking place, and then to analyze if everything has worked properly. This aim, this goal, is in a certain way rather humble, and I don't think it should be infravalued, and we shouldn't infravalue the ability of judges to get to attain this goal. But of course, education is not the panacea to guarantee quality judicial decision. And it is not amongst other reasons because education will always be non-perfect. It's very difficult to have judges all the time being trained and educated and well informed because there are so many fields of expertise and their number grows all the time. So it's not the panacea. Obviously, education is not the only way to deal with the problems posed by the entry of forensic science in the process. Susan Hack, for example, suggests as much more effective that we concentrate on what happens before that in order to prevent things from happening and in order to prevent bad forensic science to happen. So all in all, what Susan Hack is saying is that it's much better to prevent than it is to cure. I absolutely agree with her. And this, in fact, is what I said before when I pointed out that prevention is the moral way that forensic science has to follow in the near future. But even so, education is necessary. Without education, there will always be the risk of accepting as solid knowledge something that in fact is scantily scientific, and so the justice of the decision would be maimed or defective. So all in all, without education, the knowledge basis of the judicial decision becomes weak and the risk of error is much stronger. That's all. Thank you.
Well,
thank you very much. So the people willing to ask any questions, please raise your hand.
Marina, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I've liked it very much. You have been brilliant, as usual, as always. I have two questions of understanding when you were opposing deference and education. So first, education. I do share this dichotomy between these two models that Professor Allen was introducing. And of course, we need educational models, but I would like to have the details about those education models. What exactly are we talking about when we talk about an educational model? I thought when listening to you that your basic idea is education outside judiciary processes for judges. Would that be the base of that educational model, or would there be something else in that educational model? And then a second question about the second axis, deference. Do you think that somehow we are moving the deference to particular experts, to the deference towards expert communities and the empiric information that they present concerning the viability of their information? Those would be the questions. Thank you very much, Carmen, for those questions. First of all, you were talking about education. And you said that I was putting the accent about training or education outside the procedure. I would like to insist upon this a little bit more. I do share with Professor Allen, I couldn't agree more, that the key of the management of forensic science, if we want to recover that role for judges and we want judges to be able to make decisions, they need to understand. And if we compare with other kinds or types of expertise, that knowledge is particularly complex. So it's not the question of going to the school, if you allow me the expression, but to have enough knowledge to understand these issues. So it's not only outside the process or procedure, but also inside. Underlined it enough, but I think that a key to education is the expert report. I think that the expert report has to be complete and rigorous for the judges to perfectly know all the questions that have been taken into account in the evaluation and the assessment, positive and negative, in particular the negative things, or that can point out a kind of difficult issues. That is why judges should really ask to expert educational reports, pedagogical reports, and they should not have enough with reports pointing out to the conclusions, and conclusions formulated in a very linear, exaggerated way. They should really ask this kind of information about the witness, and this is part of the procedure. And of course, there are other things that would make the procedure more or less educational or differential. So the cross-examination of the experts, the fact that experts themselves can be present in the trial so that they can be asked questions as to clarify things. And I know there are proposals many times made by well-known judges and prosecutors, in the sense that experts should not be obliged to go to courtrooms, because this is just making them lose their times, and that a document is enough. I don't think a document is enough, because the document, even if it's very complete, can be difficult to understand, and there might be questions that need to be examined and clarified. And there might be questions that allow the process to be more structured for the judges to make a decision after. About difference, I don't know whether I really understood your question. I don't know whether you were asking that the fact of being different towards the expert is like having a certain difference. No, it was not that. Sorry. No, what I meant is that with empirical studies, we are asking community experts the kind of information needed to show the reliability of the information. So, I mean, I was asking about the work that expert communities can do, and I'm not saying this can be negative. Maybe that's the biggest aspiration, I don't know. But if that's the maximum and there are differences towards that community or those communities of experts, I don't know whether we have that dichotomy, really. Well, I don't think it's the same to be different as just, okay, I accept, but I'm not going to analyze, I'm not going to examine, or to being different as you are defining this within a community of experts, because that means trusting the reliability and precision of a particular analysis technique according to what the community of experts say. So if that kind of analysis would exist, showing the reliability of the report, then I don't think that's difference, you know, that's education. I mean, if it exists, but of course, if it does not exist, then that's something else. I do agree with almost everything that you said, but at the end of the answer of the first question, I think that we should really focus a little bit more on that. I think that we give too much responsibility to judges. Judges, they need to be educated, and they should not make any kind of mistakes, and so on and so forth. However, I think there is a chain of errors with other actors also, with the public prosecutors, for instance, or with lawyers, with experts, institutions also. Institutions with which experts work depend of art and science, etc. And maybe the legislature also has a certain responsibility. So I do share the idea of education, judges, and so on and so forth. But I think that if we put more pressure on the judges, then we will get to bigger problems. So I would like to say that this is a problem of the judiciary community as a whole. Thank you, Mauricio. Yeah, I do completely agree with you. I have pointed out, or I have underlined this and suggested also the other part. I mean, the control of the expert witness is an important control, and we have already talked about it. And Professor Edmond mentioned also the reliability of the method and the technique, but there are also other aspects. I mean, the biggest scandal, for instance, as regarding legal mistakes, have to do with those small things, intermediate things. How do labs do things, whether they hide information, whether there are flaws, whether experts are competent, how they are examined, what happens when an expert has lost credit but he keeps on working as an expert. Of course, there are many things, not to talk about things that have to do with the specific practice of the analysis. For instance, the DNA analysis, there can be many things about the evidence, who took the evidence, the quality of the element, has there been any kind of contamination, yes or no. Of course, all this has to be controlled. But for that, we need education, because, I don't know, but I don't think it's true that in all forensic techniques that are usually used in courts, judges do really understand what lies behind. Maybe, yes, in the case of the DNA, because there has been more training and education in that field, but for other evidence, that's not the case. We were hearing before the analysis of fingerprints. I don't know about you, but when I do talk with some colleagues that work in the courts about forensic aspects, I mean, the trust they give to those aspects has nothing to do with the critics and the criticisms that we have been listening. So we do not need to exaggerate, or we do not need to ask forensic science the 100% of what it can give to trust it. I mean, no professional practice as such is at its 100%. We all make mistakes, and in some years maybe we will know whether we are right or not to trust those analyses. But to, bearing in mind the state of the art of research right now, I think that many disciplines, you know, are in kind of moving sand. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have been following you and reading your books, and honestly, I'm very pleased to be here listening to you, and also, of course, listening to other speakers that intervened previously. We have been talking about judges, and I would like to point out the question that was asked before about other actors. So we leave the criminal part and we go to the civil part, and lawyers, sometimes we lack the knowledge we need for our work, that is to be part of that process and control evidence. Therefore, education has to be really amplified for everyone. It's important to know the situations that the evidence is posing, and in civil procedure we might not have all evidence, but we have scientific evidence and we lack the knowledge. So what I would like to say is that education in general is key. All the parts of the procedure, people that are helping justice or trying to have justice, we need that knowledge and that education. And I come to the question concerning those evidences, that reliability. I mean, you just said it. It's not that we need to doubt about everything, but all those people participating in the judiciary field, that is important for us to know more things. So the same, what we're doing today, this symposium, for instance, this is part of the knowledge, and this should be enlarged and fostered. Experts, lawyers, prosecutors, we should try to foster the knowledge on these issues so that justice is more just. But in all sectors, we need to bolster these things. Private needs to be enlarged. Thank you very much for your questions and your very kind words. I do agree with you, of course. Training and education. Judge it's a must for the judge, because he is the one that decides, or the one who has to decide. But lawyers, of course, also, they need to know whether an analysis is weak or not, or whether there have been questions that make us suspect about the quality of the information. They need to know the degree of reliability and the probatory value, depending on the technique or the method that can be attributed to some conclusions. Lawyers need to know what experts should say or not. The fact of declaring, for instance, our technique has a mistake rate of 0%. This should not be allowed. What is this? Error rate, zero error rate. No, education has to be shared. And I do agree with you. A kind of relation, double fault or multiple fault for all the actors that participate in this provision of data to the procedure, they should altogether reflect. And I think this would be very positive. And I would like to insist upon the fact that we do not need to know a lot. We do not need to know how a fingerprint analysis is perfectly done in detail, but a minimum we should be aware that today, and maybe things can be different tomorrow. I'm sure hopefully many techniques will be confirmed and validated. But today, as of today, we need to know that they are in weak stand or in a weak position. We do not need to take the value to these techniques, but it's important to know that the things are as they are, and therefore the proprietary value that can be granted to the information given by the expert in every case depends, but it cannot be 100%, and of course not the difference to say I'm not going to look at this. I mean, the two challenges have to walk in a parallel way. There is no use in experts stating their conclusions or drawing their conclusions as in the same way as they have done up to now, saying that their method is 100% reliable, or not saying almost anything, saying these are the conclusions, the fingerprint is such and such, and this handwriting coincides with this one and matches with it. No, we need both things. We need things in parallel, you know, and of course education is for the whole of the community, and probably it should start in the faculty, in the law faculty. Thank you. I like very much your intervention, your presentation, and rather than a question, I would like to make a reflection, not about something that you said, but something that you did not say, or you said less. I think that in general, it's not only that you said less in your presentation, but in general, people talk less about what I'm going to say. I'm talking about the need to work and to fund, so with public policy supporting and promoting basic forensic science. What am I thinking on? Often we think that we pass from normal standard science, if you allow me this expression, to applied science. So what forensic people are doing for a particular case. But in the middle, we need something else. There is something that no one does. In scientific groups, in universities, or in research institutes, it's not done, and it's not done in the particular expertise because it's not accessible. However, in order to improve this personal expertise, it's key. That is, if we need to identify the painting of a car that have participated in a traffic accident, so that thanks to that painting we can identify the model of the car that participated in the accident, we need information about the composition of the painting of all models in all trademarks. And this is not going to be done by the expert of that particular case. He cannot do that. He cannot do that, sorry. But who does it? We need basic forensic science, making that kind of research that needs to be available afterwards for the expert. If that basic forensic science is there, techniques improve. So if we want to produce this, we need to better train lawyers and other actors, but we need to invest in basic forensic science. And I suppose that you agree, but I invite you to just make your saying. I do agree, of course. Yes, I do agree. I mean, this kind of research, precisely because their aim is the aim that they have, should be done at a bigger scale. For instance, there is an European group of labs for crimes, and they point to the possibility to fund at European level this kind of studies. And what calls my attention, draws my attention, is that if we take into account that the main problem is not only the consolidation or the scientific founding of the different forensic disciplines, but also the communication to the courts, then one of the questions that has to be done, and not only at a regional or national level, but at a global level, is to establish shared standards as to how forensic data have to be assessed. It's very strange, for instance, in Spain, that the different forensic labs of the same discipline assess the results of analysis and communicate this information to the courts in a different way. Sometimes even within the same lab, different experts work in a different way. It's not possible. So of course we need funding, and the more the global the standard is, the better. In particular, if we know that there is a larger collaboration in that field. For instance, the example that I was talking about before, in order to analyze judicial errors, and evidence that was needed here, but that is done by the FBI. In the report of the law department of the states, it's clear that Spanish police and the FBI have a different language and use a different language. There was a kind of ambiguity or lack of precision in what they were saying, both of them. Yes, I agree. You're right. Hi, Mariano. Good evening and congratulations. I would like to ask, how does the evidence get to reach the knowledge of the judge? Because I have the feeling that we are talking about the scientific evidence that gets the judge by writing, and then it's ratified and made again in a hearing. And I think that part of the difficulties that we have, and I'm concerned that in many Latin American countries, the evidence reaches the judge in that way. And so I don't know whether there is really a possibility of control by the party affected by the evidence. And I know that the Anglo-Saxon model has had many problems, but I think that if scientific evidence in the trial, in court, by the expert in a direct way, and it's controlled by the cross-examination, then of course there we have the educational effect on the spot. I mean, if I have to explain to the court and I need the court to understand the basis of my information and my conclusions in order to pass that credibility test, as I was told at my faculty, I need to know and to understand what you say in order to assess you. So it's important to educate on basic science in order to be able to give a pronunciation. So can you develop and elaborate on that? Because I think that in many Latin American countries, this evidence reaches the judge by writing, and therefore there is no idea on the mind of the player, except when there is a jury, because then of course the situation is different in the trial, in a trial in which a jury has to make a decision. I do agree with what you suggest. And I don't know whether I talked about it or not before, but of course the expert report is not enough. It's important to be able to question the expert about the report, because even though the report might be very good, and even if judges can be educated, the report can be very complex, and we need some clarification, or clarification can be needed. So I don't know how I said it, but there are proposals, at least here in Spain, in the sense of you know, report is enough. Report is enough, and experts can stay at home because it's very boring to have them all day long. And so, well, the experts are very happy if they stay at home, and that's it. But no, this cannot be so. I mean, the expert report is fine, but the expert needs to explain and clarify any doubt. Thank you very much. I do not want to ask a question either. It's rather a comment. I would like to say that this afternoon has been very interesting to me, really. I thank you for all the presentations, the analysis of expert evidences. I mean, all the elements to analyze this are complex and more complex, and we are facing or we are trying to understand the scientific evidence, not only to assess it as judges, but as parties to that evidence and take it to court. I would like to mention two things. Education. I do completely agree with Alan's ideas and your ideas, and I'd like to add the following. The education that law people need to be able to be critical of scientific evidence is that we need education and training about theory of science. I think that that would take us to the university level to have epistemological elements to be able to be critical with information that is given during our work. And the comment made by Jordi Ferrer is very interesting about creating basic science. It's key, and it's being done already in some faculties, some universities. At least in my university, we do try to do some basic science. And I'm not talking only about the forensic group, but we need databases. Also, we do not have those databases, and they are not universal or shared in Mexico. This is a huge hindrance, a huge problem to have a genetic evidence or to have a fingerprint. If we do not know, we do not have anything to compare, that's a problem. So we, law people, we need to understand that it's important to have answers, and for those answers to be understood.
Thank you, Zoraida. What can I say? I fully agree with everything you said. And I would really like that many of the people here whom you don't know, I mean, that you could know about the great initiatives and that they knew about what you are doing, leading this institute in Mexico. I really think it's great, very interesting. Hello, thank you very, very much for your presentation. It's been so interesting. I have two very specific ideas to share with you. I don't know whether you might share them with me. First, what consequence derives from making decisions on the basis of forensic evidence regarding criminal sentences? Because it would seem that we are sentencing with too low standards, when the tendency is, at least in the States, or there are some publications saying that what we should do is precisely start lowering demands about the evidence sufficiency, to lower the standards. That first. Second, I was getting the impression or the feeling during your presentation in that there was a kind of lack of conformity regarding this kind of leap of faith. But then at the end, and especially with your responses, is rather of with who. So not so much the experts, but for the judge to decide when you have to qualitatively change, especially when we're not demanding 100%, as you said in some of your replies, never 100% to science or experts. So then who? But that leap of faith is essential. Yes, I want to ask you a clarification. Wait. What's the alternative to this leap of faith? For the expert or the judge to take the leap? No, I get the impression that this lack of conformity you have as to who has to make or give that quantum leap. So is it the expert that gives the conclusion stating that it's 100% reliable? Or is it for the judge to say when the evidence is enough that the expert has given? But I mean, if we accept a conclusion, well, then there's an inevitable leap there, a qualitative leap. Well, if somebody is affirming something that cannot be fully justified, of course, then yeah. If somebody with fragile science and fragile analysis concludes with rotund, absolute, or categorical conclusions, but if somebody speaks in a more humble language and declares on the basis of what really he or she can declare, well, then there's no problem whatsoever. Then yes, we accept that evidence. When I talked about this leap of faith, I was talking about the example of the fingerprints, but you could mention it for other types of tests. There's a leap of faith when, in my case, when on the basis of a similarity of traits, of whatever traits there may be, with no scientific basis whatsoever, in order to know or in order to interpret those similarities, I go from this to a coincidence, a match that I say is 100%. That, yes, is a leap of faith. But if I have calculated rates of error, if I have a study about the reliability of the method I'm using, and if my conclusions are declared in the very modest or humble terms that I can declare, well then, I don't see any problem there. There's no problem. For me, the problem happens in this magnification, in this exaggeration there is behind deference, yeah? When there is a weakness in the methods of analysis. There is where I see the problem. But I don't see a problem in that an analysis, a method, or a specific technique, I don't know, well-founded. I mean, it doesn't have to have a reliability of 100%, but yes, a good basis of which we know, for example, error rates. We know the sources of uncertainty, the things that can go wrong, and the expert declares, taking all these matters into account, well, then there's no problem whatsoever, because, of course, if we don't use this, if we did without the possibility of also using this evidence with these limitations, well, then we won't have anything, will we? But the problem I'm referring to is this magnification, the way they declare, the way the experts state the evidence and the effectiveness of the court. Well, time has run out. What a pity. We would love to hear all of you for much longer, but we're out of time. My thanks to Professor Ferrer Bertran for having invited us. My congratulations to you and to the audience. Good night, and we meet tomorrow again.